ulama, all of our marhumeen, of those who are here present, and all of the marhumeen who have no one to make dua for them. Rahimallahu man qara'a Surat al-Fatiha. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. Ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. أعوذ بالله السميع العليم من الشيطان اللعين الرجيم. بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. الحمد لله رب العالمين. لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله العلي العظيم. وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي. اللهم صل على فاطمة وأبيها وبعلها وبنيها والسر المستودع فيها. اللهم لعن أول ظالم ظلم حق محمد وآل محمد وآخر تابع له على ذلك. اللهم لعن الإصابة التي جاهدت الحسين وشايعت وبايعت وتابعت على قتله. اللهم لعنهم جميعا. وصلى الله عليك يا سيدي ويا مولاي يا لثارات الحسين يا حجة الله يا ابن الحسن يا صاحب العصر والزمان. اللهم صل على محمد وآل محمد. In honor of our dearest and most beloved prophets, the seal of the prophets, the greatest creation to have ever lived that mankind has ever seen, the one who said that I am from Hussein and Hussein is from me, Nabi al-A'zam, kindly offer a salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. My dearest elders, sisters, brothers, salamun alaykum wa rahmatullah. There are approximately 1.8 billion Muslims in the world today. Some estimates, when they try and count how many editions, how many copies, of the Quran exist, estimates are huge. Right the way from as much as 5 billion, others say in the region of hundreds of millions. The disparity is massive, but the number is huge nonetheless. Even if we were to say that there was 1 billion copies of the Quran, or even if we were to say there were 500 million copies of the Quran, even if you said there was just 100 million copies of the Quran, there is something wonderfully beautiful about it. Every single letter in each of those copies, every single vowel, every single fatha, kisra, dhamma, sukoon, every single grammatical mark is exactly the same between each one. An institute that trains individuals to become hafiz, protectors, memorizers of the Quran, just under their small watch, they say 40,000 have graduated under them. Now just imagine how many different memorizers, protectors of the Quran exist from the time of the Holy Prophets. It would be safe to say that even Surah Al-Fatiha is recited approximately 1 billion times per day. That's if you assume that just a small fraction of the 1.8 billion Muslims across the world pray daily. Each of those who are praying daily will recite the Fatiha 10 times in the exact same way. Tell me, is there another passage that is recited or sung or spoken daily more than Surah Al-Fatiha? After a little bit of research, I found that even the most streamed song in a single day reaches a mere few million. We're saying Surah Al-Fatiha potentially up to 1 billion times per day. Is this not in of itself a miracle of the Quran? This book is phenomenal. Just in its statistics, let alone its detail. When we board the ship of salvation of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, just like any good ship, just like any good plane, you need to read a few safety instructions, a few guidelines on how to interact when you're on the ship. And these instructions are written within the Holy Quran. Our dear Commander of the Faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi, Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajal faraj. My dear ones and sisters, energy, energy, energy. You're in the Majlis of Imam Hussein, we're in the last few nights now. Energy is everything. Focus is everything. It's time to zone into the words of Wasiyya Rasulullah, the only befitting suitor of Sayyida Zahra, Ali ibn Abi Talib, Amirul Mu'mineen, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. May Allah bless you all, inshaAllah. He's reported to say, learn the Quran, for it is the best of speeches. And study it, for it is the spring of the heart. According to Amir al-Mu'mineen, this is a phenomenal book. And we have this discussion under the very sad and almost lame attempts of some individuals in the world who are currently trying to burn the Quran. In Denmark, in Sweden, they tried it in Norway, thankfully it stopped. But there's one thing that these individuals need to know. That in the same way that when the enemies of Allah burnt the tents of Hussein, it continued to ignite the fire of our love for Hussein in our heart. The more they burn the Quran, the more it ignites the love of the Quran within our hearts as well. Yes, we show some anger, but they'll never be able to take the Quran away from us. What is so special about this book? Firstly, its unaltered nature. If you were to look at any book in the world, the majority of them have many publications. Version 1, version 2, version 3. Each of these versions, the author publishes it, and after a couple of years, after he or she gets some feedback, they make some changes. Maybe they make it from black and white to color. Maybe they adjust the chapter heading slightly. Maybe they'll add a diagram here or there. Despite how many years, 1400 years plus since the Quran was revealed, it is not altered even in the slightest. It remains to be the gold standard by which any hadith that you find in literature must be benchmarked. Authenticity and its reliability. Bring any Muslim from across the world, our brothers and sisters from the Ahlul Sunnah, from our madhab in Tashayyu, from any Muslim in the world, from any time period, if they say start reciting Surah Al-Falaq, we'll recite it in the exact same way. These weird arguments against the Shia that we have a different Quran still make me laugh to this day. I'm still waiting for one bit of evidence that they can bring. Every single app with the Quran, every single mushaf of the Quran, every single memorizer of the Quran says it in exactly the same way. And when I was in Oman, I found something very, very special. Tune in, for those of you who go to Oman, to 93.2 on your radio. And there's a 24/7 Quran radio station, to which my friend in the car was like, Sadiq, this is very normal for the Arab world. There are so many radio stations that have the Quran constantly playing. And it made me think about this translation of the word Quran. What does it actually mean? Why did Allah give it this name? Those who study the Arabic language went into detail and found 3 root names of this, all of which are quite apparent. One is qarana, i.e. the meaning to collect, to compile, to put something together. We know that the Quran was compiled over 23 years. Different verses in different orders in absolute wisdom for us to ponder over. Another name that its roots is from qarina. The concept of connecting different concepts, different ideas, which the Quran absolutely does under the single idea of Tawheed. But the interesting one that got me is that Quran can come from qara'ah, iqra, read, recite. I wonder, I can't substantiate, but I wonder, if you take every time zone in the world, all of these radio stations playing the Quran, all of us doing our salah day in, day out, could we confidently say that there has never been a point on the earth where the Quran is not being recited at least by one person in the world? Find me another book that can reach levels like this. Yet there's something quite ironic I find in these first verses that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala reveals. He begins and tells the Prophet, read, recite, iqra. Recite to the name of your Lord who created. First command of Allah through the Quran to the Prophet, read. How many of us read the Quran? Very first command from Allah, read. How many of us read the Quran? Regularly. You can define regularly. How many of us genuinely, hand on heart, can say, I read, I study, I look at the Quran regularly? Immediately after, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala then points at us again. خَلَقَ الْإِنسَانِ مِنْ عَلَقٍ. that He created man from a clinging substance or clot. We walk around as if we know everything. Allah's like, dude, you came from like literally a blood clot. Relax. Humble yourself. And in verse 5, the last of the 5 of these verses that were revealed, Allah just reminds us, just for all of the egos like mine to calm down. He says, He taught man that which he knew not. When man goes around with broad shoulders saying, I know everything under the world, I know what's best for me, I know which fiqh I should follow, which fiqh I shouldn't follow, Allah's reminding us, one point in time you knew nothing. Now you know a speck and you think you're the master. Remember the one who created you and has all the knowledge. Go back and read. The Quran is unique in the fact that it's been unaltered in all these different copies across the years. The second phenomenal thing of many that we find about the Quran is the revelation, as I said, over 23 years. From the very early days, you have the Muslims around the Holy Prophet trying to memorize this. No other books in that kind of fashion really existed then, beside the Quran. So the Muslims were heavily incentivized to try and learn it, to try and memorize it, to put it into their soul as if it was being imprinted on stone. They believed it to be the word of Allah. Therefore, they respected it with such significance. Now in my house, in your house, we'll find the Quran sat on the shelf, gathering dust. The level of respect we now pay to the Quran, unfortunately, has dropped. The Prophet at that time engaged a group of scribes to begin to write down the Quran just to ensure that it maintains its consistency. And it was massively popular amongst the Arabs who were phenomenal in their poetry. Even this made them go, who is the writer behind this book? And it pointed them to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Some then get concerned. Is there any altercation with this? We just established no. But look at the stern warning that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala even gives our Holy Prophet. In Surah 69 verses 44 to 46, He says, had He, referring to the Prophet, invented against us any sayings, we would have seized him by the right hand and then we would surely have cut his life vain. This Quran cannot be altered. Despite this rapid spread of Islam, still it remains unaltered. And I just want to point at this issue again. As I said, I've yet to find a reasonable argument laid against the Shia that somehow the Quran is altered. I still don't get it. There's a man by the name of Shaykh Sadiq that many of you may know, who was a scholar who was the answer of the dua of our awaited Savior. You can look into that story in your own time. He has a very, very clear-cut hadith that he shares, or a very, very clear-cut concept, I should say. He says, our belief is that the Quran which Allah revealed to His Prophet is as the same one of the two covers between the Dafatayn. And it is the one in which the hands of the people, and is no greater in that extent or not. The number of surahs as generally accepted is 114, and he who asserts that we say that it is greater in extent is a liar. So I just want to put that myth to bed before anyone gets a bit nervous. The fourth thing that then comes to mind is, what does it take for an individual to understand the Quran, to truly derive understanding from it? Unfortunately, in today's day and age, we're starting to hear some pretty funky rulings exist. Individuals going into the Quran, taking bits here and there, and suddenly making a ruling that goes against some of the greatest scholars of our times, and even the Ahlul Bayt, wala'udhu billah. How? If I were to bring a few lines of Shakespeare here to the table, I think you would all agree with me that if I picked someone from the street here in Karachi that doesn't speak English, they wouldn't be able to understand this Shakespeare, right? Even if, and I say this lovingly, if I were to ask a few of you guys here who speak English, given that it's not your native language, maybe you haven't studied it in depth, you're familiar with the language, even for you it would be difficult to understand Shakespeare. Even as me, as someone that only understands English, I even struggle to understand Shakespeare. Shakespeare's literary genius is dwarfed in front of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's literary genius in Arabic. How do we have some individuals trying to extract rulings from the Quran when their Arabic is so feeble? If you want to go and look to a scholar that can derive meaning from the Quran, start by assessing their understanding of the depths of the grammar. One of the students in Qom, he said to me, if you want to take your studies seriously, Sadiq,
The first thing you need to do is spend 3 years studying Arabic. 3 years studying Arabic, I'd rather not actually. Yeah, that's the difference between real scholars and the not so real scholars. And that's not 3 years to master Arabic. That's to be at a foundational level. The first thing that you need to understand something from the Quran is phenomenal Arabic understanding. The second thing that you need to know is the history of Islam. As we said, this was revealed over the span of 23 years. Specific verses at specific times. Sometimes an incomplete surah, sometimes a complete surah. So in order to understand the Quran and its essence, we need to know, why was Allah revealing this at this point versus this point? And the third thing that we need to understand is forgotten a lot. It's regularly forgotten. And unfortunately, it is doubted a lot as well. In order to understand the Quran in its depth, you need to have a deep understanding of the Holy Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alayhi wa alihi wa sallam. Allahumma salli ala Muhammad. Why? Surah number 16, verse 44. Pay very close attention to this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, وَأَنزَلْنَا إِلَيْكَ الذِّكْرَ لِتُبَيِّنَ لِلنَّاسِ مَا نُزِّلَ إِلَيْهِمْ وَلَعَلَّهُمْ يَتَفَكَّرُونَ. We have revealed to you the reminder that you may make clear to men what has been revealed to them. We've revealed this to you, O Prophet, so you can go and make it clear for them. What is the Quran is saying about the Prophet? It's saying you need to be an active interpreter, an active actor of this book, and then go and teach them. If you suddenly say, I don't need to know about the Holy Prophet, then you can't even follow a command of the Quran. It is not possible to say, I'm a Quranist, because the Quran is telling you, be a Quranist and a prophetist, if we can use that word. Quran and Hadith go absolutely side by side. You can't just have Quran without Hadith, and you can't have Hadith without the Quran. Let me give you an example of this. A man by the name of Umar ibn Muslim was one of the companions of our holy sixth Imam, Imam Ja'far and Sadiq, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala. And he used to visit the Imam frequently. Once, when he didn't visit the Imam for a long time, the Imam inquired about this man, who said, may I be made at your ransom? He has stopped working for his livelihood and has engaged himself in worship instead. You're probably thinking the Imam's going to be happy about this. This man has left his work and is now focused on ibadah. Hearing this, the Imam is confused and he says, woe unto him. Does he not know that the prayers of the one who stops working go unanswered? Ajib. During the time of the Holy Prophet, when this verse was revealed, and whoever is wary of Allah, he shall make a way out for him and provide for him for when he does not reckon. He refers to an ayah in Quran, this man, that's saying, don't worry, just trust Allah with your rizq. So he took an understanding from this verse to say, okay, if Allah is going to provide me with my rizq, then why do I need to work? I'll just go and worship. When the Prophet was informed that this had happened, he became distressed. Sallallahu ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala himself provides this sustenance. So why do we need to go and get our own sustenance? He's going to provide it to us. When the Holy Prophet was informed that this was taking place, he summoned them and objected them of this attitude of theirs. And asked, why have you abandoned your professions? They replied, Allah's taken on this responsibility. When he heard this, he said, it's not as you think. Allah does not answer the prayers of a person who, despite possessing the ability to work and exert himself, fails to do so. You must continue to engage yourself in respective professions. What's the lesson from this? And I'm sorry I stuttered on this, so I'll try and bring you back. These individuals read the Quran and say, Allah will provide. Therefore, I'll just leave my work. The Prophet comes to clarify, no. Yes, Allah provides, but I'm telling you as your Prophet, your work is also essential. Someone who only reads the Quran without hadith will end up making mistakes. Hence the Prophet was told, you come and teach them this. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we all agree, is beyond supreme perfection. And he reveals this perfect book known as the Quran. and he reveals it to a perfect prophet, divinely chosen. If we want to understand this perfection, we need interpreters of this book. And logically, if we want to maintain the truest essence of this book, those interpreters must also be perfect. They must also be divine, like the Prophet, like the Quran itself. Otherwise, the meaning will be distorted. The famous hadith of Thaqalain makes this very clear, does it not? That Rasulullah leaves behind two weighty things. Kitab Allah wa itrati ahl bayt. The Prophet puts these two things side by side in his last days on this earth. I leave behind with you two weighty things. The Book of Allah and my itra. And he goes on, indeed you will enter my presence and I will ask you about what you will do, what you have done with this Thaqalain, these two weighty things that I've given you. This concept is narrated by approximately 25 companions that our dear brothers in the Ahlul Sunnah revere. Within our books we find it 82 times is the rough count. At this point you could argue this hadith has reached the level of tawatur, i.e. it has been referenced by so many different trusted individuals that it must now reach the threshold of being true. It's not the Quran and the Sunnah, it's the Quran and the Itra. In Sunan al-Nasa'i, one of the blessed books of our Ahl Sunnah, they also cite this hadith. In Sahih al-Bukhari, they have another version of this hadith, all going back to Quran and Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam. One is required for the other. If you look slightly deeply at this, the Prophet goes forward and mentions these two things side by side, both of them being proofs of Allah for the Ummah. What do we learn? Firstly, the Prophet's itra, the Prophet's family is just like the Quran, it's side by side. And therefore in religious affairs, both ideological and jurisprudential, the word of the Quran must be obeyed and the word of Ahl al-Bayt must be obeyed. And one cannot turn their back on either. Otherwise it would be like they've turned their back on the Quran. The word of Ahl al-Bayt is hujjah upon every single Muslim in the world. The second thing that we notice, and every Muslim would agree with, is that the Quran is absolutely free of error, free of distort, as we said. How and why would the Prophet put something that is free of error, the Quran, next to something that is not free of error? It would not make sense. The Prophet puts the Quran side by side with another thing that is supremely perfect and absolutely free of error. The Quran says falsehood cannot approach it. From before it, not from behind. Similarly, nothing like that can happen to the Ahl al-Bayt either. Some will say, no, this freedom of sin that you're talking about of the Ahl al-Bayt, this is only for the Prophets. But in Surah Al-Imran, verse 42, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala addresses Maryam alayhi salam. Ya Maryam, inna Allah astafaki wa tahiraki wa astafaki ala nisa al-alameen. So that it's clearly not the case. If Maryam is also being cleansed, this isn't just for the case of the Prophets either. Without the Ahl al-Bayt alayhim as-salam, you cannot understand the Quran correctly. Fact. There's a beautiful verse that Allah then mentions in the Quran. He says, and those who disbelieve say, why has a sign not been sent down to him from his Lord? And then he addresses the Prophet, you are only a warner. And for every people there is a guide. وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ. First question to keep into your head, after the Prophet dies, if Allah says that for every generation, وَلِكُلِّ قَوْمٍ هَادٍ, there is a guide, is it not the case that Allah would need to prescribe for the Ummah who this guide would be? Or do you think Allah forgot and it was left to fallible man? In fact, our Prophet makes it very, very clear for us. He's reported to say that when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala revealed this ayah, I am the one who puts fear of Allah in the minds of the people, and Ali is the one who is their guide. Oh Ali, after me, people searching for the right path would find it only by adhering to you. The Holy Prophet saying about Amir al-Mu'mineen in reference to the ayah. Look at this. Without the Holy Prophet, who would we have known to be the guide for these individuals? The Prophet makes it abundantly clear because that was his job, to go and teach us this Quran. Countless narrations attest towards Amir al-Mu'mineen being the talking Quran, the walking Quran. In everything that he did, he was the walking manifestation of the Quran after the Holy Prophet. So how can you go against? Just look at Nahj al-Balagha. You look at Nahj al-Balagha and it's like a commentary of the Quran. Without Quran and Ahl al-Bayt, we're absolutely lost in this world. There's a very subtle but beautiful point here to mention about the commander of the faithful, Amir al-Mu'mineen, Ali ibn Abi Talib, salawatullahi wa salamu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala. In Ghadir, the famous incident where the Holy Prophet raises the hand of Ali ibn Abi Talib and says, "Man kuntu mawla fahadha Ali mawla." Whoever I am master you. If the sisters could kindly try and move as far forward as they can with the salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Pay very close attention to these points, my dear brothers and sisters. They will help you get your firm foundation in this faith. If you stay with the Quran and Ahl al-Bayt, you'll never go astray. At Ghadir, where Amir al-Mu'mineen is announced to now be the leader of the Ummah, you could argue that there should be some kind of acceptance speech by Amir al-Mu'mineen. Right? He's just been given a great honor. Even when the censors are opened, or a new company is opened, there will always be a speech by the person that's now been nominated to be the new leader of the company. Nothing of the sort in Ghadir. Why? Amir al-Mu'mineen does not deem that a success. That's his role. It's normal. This is what he was made for. When does Amir al-Mu'mineen then deem it to be a success? When he gets struck on the head in Kufa and he says, "Fuztu wa Rabbil Kaaba." By the Lord of the Kaaba, now I have prospered. Only at the point where Amir al-Mu'mineen finishes his journey in the dunya and he knows that he has controlled himself with patience just how the Prophet ordered him, then he says, "When you strike me, now I am successful." Where do we believe Hussein ibn Ali learned this lesson of Shahada from? He is the Ibn of Ali ibn Abi Talib. He is the product of Ali ibn Abi Talib. And what does the Quran then have to go and say about Imam al-Hussein? Surah Al-Fajr, those heartbreaking last verses. Ya ayyuhan nafsul mutma'inna. Oh, the most tranquil, righteous soul. Irji'i ila rabbika radiyatan maradiyya. Return to your Lord in a state of being well pleased and pleasing to Him. Fadkhuli fi ibadi. Enter among my servants. Wadkhuli jannati. And enter paradise. How do we know this is about Imam al-Hussein? We go back to the Ahl al-Bayt. Imam al-Sadiq is reported to say, read Surah Al-Fajr in your obligatory and your mustahab prayers, for it is indeed the chapter of Hussein, and have a liking to it, and may Allah have mercy on you. And then he explains the verses and why they apply to Imam al-Hussein. The Quran and Ahl al-Bayt go side by side. How does the Quran then come and introduce itself? The more we understand this, the more we see the purpose, the more we'll start to build a relationship with it. The Quran is clear that these words within it are the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The Prophet is not the author by any stretch of the imagination. Rather, he's relaying whatever Jibreel has given to him. And it describes its other function as the presentation of the Prophet mission itself, as a guidance of humanity by delivering it min al-dhulumat ila nur, from the darkness into the light, from these vices that the Arabs were facing at the time and the vices that we face today and the vices we've been describing over the last few days, from egoism, from enslavement to desires, from greed, etc., towards nur. One very interesting point that I'd like to share with you, just to whet your appetite to want to go forward and understand the Quran. A quick show of hands. How many are familiar with this phrase in the Quran? Min al-dhulumat ila an-nur. A quick show of hands. Yeah? Brothers, no one. No one reads the Quran, the brothers. Please, show me your hands. It's not that difficult. Ahsantum. Min al-dhulumat ila an-nur. We've said it so many times in the Quran. Ayatul Kursi. Min al-dhulumat ila an-nur. Note this subtle detail about this beautiful way that the Quran is written. Min, from al-dhulumat. Dhulumat is the plural of dark. It is darknesses. Allah is saying, I will take you from the darknesses, plural, ila, towards an-nur. How many nurs? One. Biharul Anwar is the plural of nur. From all of these multiple darknesses that could exist in the 21st century to the 1st century, ila an-nur, the single light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is shone through the Ahlul Bayt salawatullahi wa salamu alayhim ajma'een. One light, one tawheed, many ships that can get you to one direction. And the most spacious and the fastest of them is the ship of Hussein alayhi salam. And this is why the Quran is even relevant till today. Don't get into this mindset that the Quran was a book for the Arabs. No, it's a book for the entire of mankind. For every creation of Allah. These darknesses, these dhulumat that we live in today have been discussed in the Quran and commentated by the Ahlul Bayt. One of the biggest vices that keeps being spoken about, and I hate to bring it up again, and it feels distasteful to bring it up on the minbar of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, but we have to warn our brothers and sisters of what's going on. The LGBT movement has been relentless. And I know some of you will say, oh, it's not quite reached Pakistan. I now have proof that it has reached Pakistan amongst our youth. Don't be naive in thinking that what they're looking at online and what you're looking at online is not now global. Just because you're in Pakistan, just because you're in an Islamic country. We saw an incident of it in Oman. We've seen incidents of it in Iraq, in Iran. It's not confined to just the West. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has dealt with this in the Quran through the story of Lut. If we just use the Quran just to say it was a book for back then, of course, we're not going to value it. If we're not going to have the valid interpreters of it, of course, we're not going to value it. What's startling, however, is that we were speaking with one of the scholars in Qom. And we said there was a discussion amongst us, a very legitimate conversation, where we're saying, look, this movement is picking up so much traction. Is it possible that the ulama can write down the absolute proofs as to why this is so problematic and not allowed in the faith? He said, yeah, we can, but it's kind of funny that you asked me to do that. I was like, why is it funny? It's not a funny issue. It's dead serious. He said, you're asking me to write down why something so immoral is immoral. What do you want from me next? To write down that murder is immoral? To write down that incest is immoral? And he made something really abundantly clear to me. He said, the fact that you've been living in a society that is promoting this concept so much, even though you don't engage in it, even though you're not a proponent of it, your level of hatred for this sin has softened to the extent that you now want proof that it is haram. The changes are very subtle, my dear brothers and sisters. As we discussed in the last few nights, we need to be detesting these sins. As you guys know, I have a bit of a pet peeve. I have many pet peeves. But one in particular is when people take a verse out of context and stick it as their WhatsApp picture, just the nice part of the verse. Or they stick it on Facebook or just on Instagram, just for the nice part. It's beautiful that you're posting the Quran, but we always only post the parts that are positive. The entire Quran is positive. We just don't like the other half because we feel it adds us a little bit. The verse that I'm talking about is when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Say, O Muhammad, travel through the land. Now, all of these Islamic holiday makers, and I highly recommend halal holidays, definitely try and get away from those resorts serving alcohol as much as you can. All of these halal holiday makers, they'll have this nice part of the Quran. قُلْ سِيرُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ. Go and travel the world. What's the very next part of the verse? Say, O Muhammad, travel through the world and observe how the end of those were before. Most of them were associators with Allah. أَكْثَرُهُمْ مُشْرِكُونَ. Mushrikeen, afwan. Go and look at Lut's community and see how they ended. Go and learn from that. The Quran is timeless for us. First, it was premarital relationships that was the issue. Then it became same gender. Mark my words, it's already started in the US and started to soften in the UK, that paedophilia is being rebranded. Mark my words. When you step outside of Sharia, there's no boundary anymore. You do whatever you think and feel is right. And it goes back to this point that we need to invest in our belief system over and over and over again. Amir al-Mu'mineen is advised by the Holy Prophet in his last words. He's reported to say, "Oh Ali, I advise you to recite the Quran in every state which you might find yourself in. Constantly recite this Quran." Every day we hear from our parents or from our teachers, try and recite 5 minutes of Quran, 10 minutes of Quran. Very few of us do it. We struggle to do it. We say there's not going to be any value in it. If you haven't tried it, try it before you say there's no value in it. There is so much barakah that will reach your soul when you recite the Quran. I remember personally, when I was super stressed with my economics exams back at university, the one thing that I would do, almost like it's like a distraction, but I didn't realize it would make me calm down, was just to recite some Quran on the musalla. These words of Allah are built for us. They're designed for us, every single letter within it. But of course, logically, it doesn't make sense just to repeat these words without any understanding. Reciting is essential, and it's the first step, and it's the necessary step to go and understand it, because you need to read the book. But in equal measure, comprehension is also vital, with the intention of educating ourselves. Allah says in the Quran in 38:29, "This is a book that we've sent down to you. Blessed that men possessed of mind may ponder its signs, so remember." Go and think about it. Go and reflect on it. We're in such a sad state of affairs that if I were to take off this microphone and go to anyone in the crowd and say, "Can you please read from any page in the Quran?" many of us will start to shake. Not me, not me, not me. Don't come to me, don't come to me. My dear parents, if you want your children to recite the Quran, show them yourself reciting the Quran and enjoying it. And if you struggle to read the Quran, show yourself trying to learn how to read the Quran and let your children see it. My dear children, if you have a desire to read the Quran, go and grab your parents and ask them to sit next to you and recite the Quran. My dear parents, don't stay on your phone when they ask you to recite the Quran. Don't just send them to the madrasa hoping they're coming back with knowing how to read the Quran. Train them, nurture them, invest in them. And my dear youngsters who are soon to get married, if you yourself cannot recite the Quran yet, go and invest in this. Go and find a partner that will help you learn so that your children can definitely recite it. There's a beautiful realization that we find within the Quran. One function of this book is to teach us, is to instruct us. And to do so, this book uses logical arguments that we use for our discussions. But the Quran is also a book that speaks to the heart, that speaks to the feeling. And therefore it uses the language of feeling. Both the intellectual side of our faith and the loving side of our faith are necessary. One shakes our intellect, the other one shakes the desires that we have and brings them into balance. Tell me, when someone recites the verse of death, like when our dear Sadiq recites these beautiful verses, which many of us don't even attend for. We have 3 nights left. You have a phenomenal reciter of the Quran and we don't even want to attend on time for that part of the majlis. Let me ask you this. Parents, again, you're in control of the car. I understand Karachi has crazy traffic. I understand that. I know many of you are coming from far. If you want your child to value the Quran, at least be present for the recitation of the Quran by such an amazing reciter. What excuses are we coming up with? It will change your soul and their soul. It speaks the language of feeling, but this book also speaks the language of the intellect. Find me another book like it. The Prophet's told in Surah Al-Muzammil, وَرَتِّلِ الْقُرْآنَ تَرْتِيلًا, recite it in a melodious, most beautiful way. The Quran instructs those in the heat of battle. It addresses the scientists trying to uncover the mysteries of the world. And it also gives us du'as as humble slaves in front of our Lord on how to supplicate to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What a book! Yeah, we've ditched it. We've absolutely ditched it. And credit to our brothers from the Ahl Sunnah. Their qira'ah of Quran is phenomenal amongst the masses. Phenomenal. Yes, we may differ on understanding, but their qira'ah of Quran is second to none. The amount of those individuals that learn the Quran by heart is phenomenal. Their focus on Quran is unrelentless. Invest for your children and in yourself. Go and learn the fada'il of Ahl al-Bayt and go and learn the fada'il of the Quran in the same measure. If your son or child has a beautiful voice in reciting marfiya and know her, ensure they have that same beautiful voice applied to the Quran. Why have we left one behind? The Prophet said, I need both of them. And I'm going to ask you, what did you do with these two weighty things that I gave you? You clung on to Hussein, beautiful, but you neglected the book that he defended. So what were you seeking? What were you seeking? Evidently, this is a book that requires not just our attention, but our most urgent attention. And if you would like to pledge an allegiance of urgent attention to the Quran this evening, kindly offer salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. If you want to go and understand the Quran, my dear brothers and sisters, go and buy a copy of tafsir, of commentary. Go to those individuals who have spent time and been trained to go and understand the verses of the Quran. I had a whole thing here about the different tafsirs that are available to us. There are many, but one in particular that many of us will have access to is Al-Mizan by His Eminence, Allama Tabatabai. A phenomenal commentary on the Quran that you can now find almost in completion. Inshallah, still a bit more work to go online. Just type Al-Mizan Tabatabai in Google and there's a beautiful digital platform for you to go through. Go and invest in it. But the point I want to make here is this. We just want to see what does it take of a scholar in order to write something like Al-Mizan. My dear brothers and sisters, you need to be very careful where you get your knowledge from. Allah is clear in the Quran. He addresses us, go and see where you get your food. فَلْيَنْظُرِ عَلَىٰ طَعَامِهِ. Go and look where your food is coming from. The hadith tells us that this food is not just food of the body, it's food of the soul. Food of the soul is ilm. Where are you getting your ilm from? We're especially careful to make sure that the restaurant washes the meat before they cook it. But we're not at all careful that an individual has washed their soul before they teach us. Al-Mizan by Allama Tabatabai is outstanding. What does it take from him in order to try and write this? Firstly, it takes him 20 years. How coincidental or not that he completes it on the 23rd of Shahr Ramadan. Just ponder on that. He begins his tafsir by quoting the walking, talking Quran, Amir al-Mu'mineen. How apt is that? A man who spends 20 years studying the Quran, he begins his commentary with a quote from Amir al-Mu'mineen. Sometimes we think these scholars just sit back, they just memorize hadith, they just pray, they don't know what's going on. Let me just explain the academic ability of Allama Tabatabai. Worked on his soul so much, known for it amongst all of the ulama. He'd embedded himself within scientific and intellectual merits. He was known to be a man of absolute truth. Every aspect of this was the truth. He was a big advocate of calligraphy. What's a calligrapher doing with the Quran? Look at how well-rounded he is. Arts, it's there. He's an expert in how letters are structured and how numbers are structured. In traditional astronomy to the extent that he could create a calendar. In algebra, in geometry, in arithmetic. He's got the sciences. This man had so much about him. And kindly offer salawat ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad. And another salawat in honor of Amir al-Mu'mineen. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ali Muhammad wa ajjal farajah. He combines the Islamic sciences with the secular sciences. Allow me to correct this. All of the sciences are Islamic in the first place. Don't see a difference between the two. But is it enough just to sit here and recite Quran every now and then? Because some of us are guilty of this, like myself. We don't invest in the Quran anywhere near as much. It's said that when one of the kings of Egypt died, the ruling administration at the time asked an individual to go and recite the Quran at his grave continuously. It was discovered at one point that this Quran reciter had actually left his post and was nowhere to be seen. Upon searching, they managed to find this Quran reciter that was given that task. They asked him, "Where did you go? What's happened?" And he simply replied, "I will not recite the Quran anymore." They offered him extra for his services. He refused. "Even if you multiply this, I'm not going to recite the Quran at this grave." Why not? They demanded an explanation from him. He said some days ago, he saw the king in a dream, and he objected to him reciting Quran for him. He said, "Why are you reciting Quran over my grave?" He said to him, "Look, I've been asked to recite this Quran so that you receive its rewards." The king replies to him, "I do not receive any reward for your recitation. On the contrary, with every verse that you recite, the intensity of the fire engulfing me is increased." The king continues, "I'm told, do you hear the verses of the Quran? Yet whilst in the world, why did you not act in accordance with the teachings of the Quran?" The reciter then pleaded, "Relieve me of this responsibility of reciting the Quran for this impious king of yours." It's all well and good reciting it. Even if you spend your whole life studying it. Even if you write a whole tafsir on the Quran, if your actions don't manifest into what the Quran is telling you, it was meaningless. And I want to remind you of a hadith that I mentioned a few nights ago, but I got the feedback that this hadith wasn't so clear, so I want to make it abundantly clear. And this hadith comes from our awaited Saviour's father, Imam Hassan al-Askari, salawatullahi wa salamuhu alayhi. Allahumma salli ala Muhammadin wa ala Muhammad. My dear parents, listen very closely, and those of you who wish to be parents in the future, listen closely. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala covers some parents with a garment that is worthier than this world and all that it encompasses, for which all of the creations look up to them and honor them. And they look at themselves in surprise. And they say, "Oh Lord, how did we attain this when our deeds didn't earn them?" So it is said to them, it is by teaching your child the Quran and making him insightful of the Islamic religion. The elevated status of your Quran and your aqa'id. Because your aqa'id involves Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam. This is why we've spent time last year when I was with you, and this year whilst I've been with you, for me to understand and for us all to understand our belief system again. And tonight we now add the Quran into the mix, even though we've been mentioning ayahs from the Quran throughout. Therefore, my recommendation to this beloved community here in Karachi, full of English speakers, mashallah, go and invest in an institution for Quran and Hadith. Go and ensure this institution has the Arabic editions of the Quran and Hadith and the English editions. Go and invest in teachers to come here to teach your children the Quran and the Hadith. On recitation, on tafsir, on the understanding of the Arabic language. Go and invest in it. At least then when you return to Allah, you can say, "Look, I tried to set the foundation for my children and my children's children and my children's children's children." There is a beautiful book that you can access online, all of you. Not even on Amazon. It's on the WF shop. On Tadabbur of Quran. And it's on Surah Al-Fatiha and the 4 Quls. Go and invest in this book. I think it's like £5 to buy on the online version. You'll have it tonight. Print it. Put it on the table. Discuss it with your family. Just do something in the way of Allah and watch how He comes back to you. Tadabbur al-Quran. I can post it inshallah on the group. The Quran is central. Just like how Ahlul Bayt alayhim as-salam is central. And Amir al-Mu'mineen puts this into perfect practice, unsurprisingly. He nurtures Quran and the teachings of the Quran within his children. So much so that his dear son Imam al-Hassan is reported to say, the one who recites the Quran has a supplication of his answered, be it immediately or later. When you recite the Quran, a supplication of yours is accepted, be it now or later. I therefore ask you, O Imam al-Hassan, was one of your du'as after you recited the Quran that was accepted for you to have a set of sons that would protect your brother on the day of Ashura in Karbala? Sallallahu alayka ya Sayyidi wa ya Mawlaya ya Aba Abdillah. Sallallahu alayka ibn Rasulullah. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam is now in Karbala. All of his companions are gone. He's seen death, death, death. He's seen success, success, success. He's gone out to run to so many of his beloved friends, look them in the eye as they take their final breath. He's wiped blood from faces. He's carried bodies back to the tents. He's consoled loved ones who have lost loved ones. Yet Hussein alayhi salam remains absolutely strong. He sees Muslim go. He sees Habib go. He sees Hur go. He's still going. Hussein, I ask you, what are you going through in this point? Because I know and you know that at this point, once your companions are all finished, that there's only one group of people left to go towards their fates. And that is the family of Rasulullah. How are you preparing yourself, Hussein? Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam sees his dear son Ali al-Akbar emerge from the tent. Tonight is not the night of the Masa'ib of Akbar, but even Hussein has to somehow handle the brutal murder of his son. He then sees he then sees Muhammad. He then sees Abdul Rahman, the son of Aqil, and Muhammad, the son of Muslim, all go out and not return. He sees Hassan al-Muthanna, the second son of Imam al-Hussein. He would take 18 wounds to his body. He would lose his right hand, but he would not eventually die in Karbala. Imagine Imam al-Hussein has to deal with all of this pain from his family members. He then sees another son of Amir al-Mu'mineen and another son of Aqil go out and not return. Oh Hussein, when you call out Hal min nasirin yansuruna, I say laka labbaik ya Hussein, ma'akum, I am with you, la ma'aduwikum, and I'm not with your enemies, ya Hussein. Where are you getting the strength from, Hussein? Where? The reality is that he would remember that his brother had already warned him of this day, that his mother had already warned him of this day, and that Rasulullah had warned him of this day. He's been nurtured, he's been trained, he's ready for this day. On the night of Ashura, it is reported that Imam al-Sajjad talks of a conversation that he sees take place between an uncle and a nephew. This young nephew, 12, 13, 14 perhaps, He asked, "Oh uncle, will I be killed?" The young man is caressed close to the chest of Imam Hussein. "Oh nephew, tell me, how do you see death?" When you're trained with Quran and Ahlul Bayt, this is the kind of answer you come out with. Qasim alayhi salam would reply to Imam al-Hussein, "Oh my uncle, death to me is sweeter than honey." Al-Hussein replies, "Yes, by Allah, indeed this is sweeter." On the day of Ashura, Qasim ibn al-Hassan would eventually realize this was the moment. This was the moment that my father al-Hassan had prepared me for. Qasim would emerge from the tent, from the family of Rasulullah. All of you parents that have had or have an 11, 12, 13-year-old child, just imagine this moment, that your nephew or your son or your daughter emerges, looking into your eyes, saying, "Death to me is sweeter than honey. Let me go and face these enemies and achieve shahada. Even if they chop my body into pieces, I want this." It's said that he was reported to be in his early youth, and he was described as his face resembled the crescent moon. Perhaps Imam al-Hussein would have a difficult moment letting go of al-Qasim. "Oh my Qasim, oh my Qasim, I can't let you go. Oh my Qasim, oh my Qasim, I can't let you go." Why? Why, Hussein? "How can I bear to see your body covered in arrows, just like your father during his funeral moments? How many sons will I lose today, oh ya Allah? Surely I will have my newborn still alive, asghar." Qasim emerges. When Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam sees him, he holds him close and he cries. This is an amanah from his brother Hassan. They discuss. And I don't know what overcomes the heart of Hussein to eventually say, "Oh Qasim, I now give you the permission to fight." Oh Hussein, as you look towards Qasim, I suspect that you would remember the tragedies in Medina that befell upon Fatima and Hassan. Qasim would ride out into the battlefield. He would hold a sword, wearing a shirt and trousers and a pair of sandals. What a detail! Why sandals? He would say, "In tunkiruni fa'ana najlul Hasan." If you do not recognize me, I am the son of Hassan. Sibt al-Nabi al-Mustafa wal-Mu'taman, the grandson of the Prophet al-Mustafa. Hadha Husayn kal-asir wal-Murtahan. This is Hussein tied down like a prisoner. Bayna unasin la suqu sawb al-muzn, among those people who may Allah deprive from His blessings. Qasim alayhi salam would begin to fight the enemies. On his left foot was cut, but the grandson of the Prophet refused to fight barefooted. Qasim alayhi salam would kneel down down, he would go to fix his sandal. He wasn't worried about the enemies that surrounded him. Oh Qasim, look out for the enemies. As he was doing this, a man would come and attack Qasim. Before even this, a man asked the man who attacked him, what do you want from this young boy? Is it not enough that these thousands have surrounded him? He said, I swear by Allah that I will attack him. He did not leave Qasim alone. Eventually he would strike the blessed head of the son of Hassan Qasim. The boy would fall on his face. He would call out, Ya Ammi, oh my uncle. His mother's reported to have been standing in her tent. Oh mothers, imagine you see your son be struck and fall to the ground. She looks at him in strike. She looks at him in shock. Imam al-Hussein runs like an angry lion to the battlefield. He strikes the murderer with his sword. This man tries to defend himself and Hussein goes right through him. The dust settles. Here is Hussein with Al-Qasim with his head in his lap. My dear brothers and sisters, there's a really tough detail that I need to share with you. Really tough detail. And it shows you just maybe how young Qasim was, or may I say how much pain he was in. The historians all report that when they see the body of Al-Qasim with Imam al-Hussein, they see the little feet of Qasim wailing around in the air. Imam al-Hussein says, Bu'dan liqawmin qataluk, may the people who killed you be distanced from Allah's mercy. Khasmuhum yawm al-qiyamati jadduka wa abuk, and your grandfather and father will be their enemies on the day of judgment. But look at this line from Hussein. Oh Hussein, are you remembering that Al-Hassan gave you this amana to look after? Now you say, Hussein, Azza wallah ala ammika. It is so difficult for your uncle that you called him, but he couldn't respond to you. Or he responded, but he cannot help you. Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam, he picks up the body of Qasim. He carries him on his chest, the blessed chest of Hussein. What would be on your chest soon now, Imam Hussein? Imam al-Hussein carries Qasim on his chest. The feet of Qasim are dragging in through the ground. He lays al-Qasim to rest next to the body of Ali al-Akbar. على لعنة الله على القوم الكافرين وسيعلم الذين ظلموا أي منقلب ينقلبون والعاقبة للمتقين Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. May Allah accept all of your tears. Do not stop crying. Continue to let yourself mourn. When you hear that voice of Hussein being echoed around this room, continue to mourn. Continue to mourn. Continue to join in. Imam Sadiq says, all praise is for Allah who has placed amongst the people those who arrive in our presence, who eulogize about us and who recite eulogies about us. So if you want to be the dua of Imam Sadiq on this night, you must call out in the aza of Imam al-Hussein alayhi salam. Form your lines, pay due respect, for this is Qasim, the son of Al-Hassan. Ya Hussein, Ya Hussein.